Lisa Marie Presley walked onto the Tonight Show stage, and nobody had told Jimmy Fallon she was coming. Not from the wings, not from the curtain, not from anywhere a guest was supposed to emerge. She came from the back of the studio, through the audience, down the center aisle, the way a person walks when they are not making an entrance, but simply arriving without announcement, without the particular velocity of performance, at her own pace, in her own time, with something held against her chest in both arms that she was carrying with the careful deliberateness of someone transporting a thing that cannot be replaced. The audience recognized her before the cameras found her. A sound moved through the studio from the back to the front like a wave. Not applause, not a gasp. Something between the two. The sound a room makes when it sees something it was not prepared to see and does not yet know what to do with. Jimmy Fallon heard that sound from the stage and turned. He saw her. He looked at what she was carrying. And then Jimmy Fallon took 3 steps backward, found the edge of his desk behind him, and held onto it with both hands because his legs had stopped being reliable. It was a Tuesday night taping. January 2023. The Tonight Show. The episode had a full guest lineup and a full rundown and a production team that had accounted for every variable in the next 90 minutes of television, except for the one that was now walking down the center aisle of the studio in a dark coat with her father's eyes and her mother's composure and something in her arms that the front rows were beginning to understand the shape of. She had not called ahead. She had not arranged anything with anyone. She had parked her own car in the public garage on 49th Street, walked to the building, told the security desk her name, and waited while they made calls. She had been escorted to a seat in the back of the studio 40 minutes before taping by a floor producer who was too professional to ask why she was there and too human to be entirely steady about it. She had watched the first 40 minutes of the show from the back row. She had waited. And when the moment between segments opened like a door, she had stood up and walked. Jimmy was still holding the desk when she reached the stage steps. He moved toward her then, away from the desk, toward the steps, meeting her at the top of them with his hand extended, and she took it, and he held it. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. He looked at what she was carrying. It was a guitar case, old. The leather gone soft and dark with age, the brass clasps worn to the color of old coins, the handle wrapped in black electrical tape that had been there long enough to become part of the case. Along the side, in the particular fading that happens to things that have been loved and handled and taken everywhere over a very long time, 2 initials in gold leaf that were still just legible. E. P. Jimmy Fallon looked at the case. He looked at Lisa Marie. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. She said, "I need you to help me with something." The entire studio froze. It was a Tuesday night taping. January 2023. The Tonight Show. 300 people in their seats, not one of them moving, watching a woman set her father's guitar case on the desk of The Tonight Show with both hands and stand beside it, with the expression of someone who's been carrying something for a very long time and has arrived, finally, at the place it needed to go. The director in the control room held every camera and did not call for anything. The floor manager stood with her clipboard at her side. The segment producer, who had built this evening's rundown with the precision of someone who understood that live television was controlled chaos and the controlling was the job, set her headset on the production table and simply watched. Nobody moved toward a commercial break. Nobody moved toward anything except the woman at the desk and the old guitar case with the gold initials and Jimmy Fallon holding the edge of his desk like a man who has just understood something enormous. He said, "Whose guitar is inside that case?" Lisa Marie said, "That's the question I came here to answer. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1954. Elvis Presley wasn't always Elvis Presley. Not the phenomenon, not the earthquake, not the name that divided popular music into before and after with the same finality that a fault line divides the earth. In the summer of 1954, he was 19 years old and living in Memphis, Tennessee, in a two-bedroom house on Alabama Avenue with his mother and his father, and the specific weight of being 19 years old in 1954 in Memphis with no money and no plan, and a feeling that had been building in him for years that he could not name but could not stop feeling. The feeling of something in him that needed to get out and did not yet know the shape of the door. He drove a truck, Crown Electric Company, delivering supplies across the city in a white truck with the company name on the door, 5 days a week, 7 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. He was good at the job, reliable, careful, always on time. And he was not interested in the job in any way, except as the means of paying the bills while whatever else was going to happen decided to happen. He sang in the truck. He sang everywhere, always had. Since he was a child in Tupelo, sitting in the front pew at the Assembly of God Church on Adams Street, where the music entered him like weather, like something the air did rather than something people made. He had taught himself guitar from the age of 11, with the focused obsession of someone learning a language they had always spoken in their sleep. In June of 1954, he walked into Sun's studio on Union Avenue for the second time. The first time, the previous year, had produced nothing useful, and recorded 2 songs with Sam Phillips and a guitarist named Scotty Moore and a bassist named Bill Black. The session ran late into the night. Near midnight, between takes, fooling around with a song that was not on the list for the evening, something happened in the room that none of the 4 people present would ever find adequate words for afterward. The music changed register. It became something that was not quite what any of them had been doing before that moment, something that contained all of it, and was also its own separate thing entirely. Sam Phillips stopped the tape and then started it again, and nobody said anything because there was nothing to say, except that they had just heard something that had not existed until 11 minutes ago. 3 weeks later, the record was on the radio. But before the radio, before the record, before the night in Sun's studio that changed everything, there was a Tuesday afternoon in May of 1954 when Elvis Presley drove his delivery truck to a house on Bellevue Boulevard in Memphis and carried 2 heavy boxes of electrical supplies up a front walk to the door of a woman named Ida Mae Tanner. She was 71 years old. She had lived alone in the house on Bellevue Boulevard since her husband passed in 1951. A widowhood she had organized around with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a woman who had grown up in rural Mississippi during the Depression and had learned early that the most useful response to difficulty was to continue. She taught piano lessons on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons to the children of her neighborhood, which gave the house its rhythm and gave her life its shape and generated a modest income that combined with her husband's pension to make things manageable. She had been teaching piano for 37 years. She had taught over 400 children, some of whom had gone on to play seriously, and most of whom had gone on to live their lives with the piano as a small, warm memory from childhood, which she considered both outcomes equally worthy. Elvis carried the boxes to the door. Ida Mae answered. He set them inside, and she signed the delivery receipt, and he was turning to go when he heard it, coming from the back of the house. From what he understood must be the piano room, the sound of a child very slowly and very seriously picking out a melody that he recognized. An old hymn. One he had sung at Adams Street Church, not played correctly, not played smoothly, played the way beginners play things that matter to them, with total concentration and total imprecision. Every note landed with the full weight of intention, even when it landed in the wrong place. He stood on the front step for a moment. Then, without quite deciding to, he turned back. He asked Ida Mae, "Is that you teaching in there?" she said. "My 3 o'clock hasn't left yet." "Why?" He said, "I just wanted to say that whoever that kid is, they're going to be something." Ida May looked at him. She was a small woman with gray hair worn in the practical style of a woman who had decided decades ago that hair was not worth significant attention. And she had the particular directness of eye contact that comes from 37 years of looking at children across a piano bench and understanding that the most honest thing you could do for them was see them clearly. She looked at Elvis the way she looked at children across the piano bench. She saw him clearly. She said, "Come inside for a minute." He came inside. The child at the piano was a boy named Gerald, 7 years old, the son of a pharmacist on Lamar Avenue. And he finished his lesson with the total unself-consciousness of a 7-year-old who has not yet learned to be embarrassed by imperfection in front of strangers. When he left, Ida May poured 2 glasses of iced tea and set them on the side table in the piano room and sat in her teaching chair and looked at Elvis, who was sitting on the bench with his hands in his lap, looking at the piano the way people look at things they have a relationship with. He stayed for 2 hours. She asked him about his music, not with the vague, encouraging curiosity that adults typically deployed with young people who had artistic ambitions, but specifically, technically, with the precision of someone who had spent 37 years understanding how musical ability actually developed and what it needed and what got in the way of it. She asked him what he heard when he heard a song he wanted to sing. He told her, in the hesitant way that people describe the inside of their own processes when they have never been asked before. He heard the space underneath the melody first. He heard what the song was resting on before he heard the song itself. She nodded at this. She asked if he had formal training. He had not. She asked if he read music. He did not. She told him that was not a problem, that reading music and understanding music were related but not identical, and that some of the most complete musical understanding she had encountered in 37 years had belonged to people who processed it entirely by ear, which was not a lesser kind of knowing. It was a different kind, just as rigorous, if you were rigorous about it. Nobody had ever said that to him before. They talked about the hymns from Adam Street Church and about the blues musicians he had heard on Beale Street and about the way those 2 things lived in him simultaneously and felt like a tension he hadn't resolved. Ida May listened to this without any sign that it was unusual or complicated. She said, "Most of the music worth making comes from exactly that kind of tension. The places where 2 things you love don't fit together comfortably are the places where something new gets made." She said it simply, the way she said everything, without decoration, as plain truth. Elvis sat with it the way he sat with things that landed correctly, quietly, letting it settle. Before he left, she went to the corner of the piano room where a guitar stood against the wall, an old instrument, not ornate, with a warm, sunburst finish that had darkened with age to the color of autumn light. It had belonged to her son, she said, who had played it through his 20s and then left it here when he moved to Atlanta. And it had been leaning against that wall for 11 years, and she was not a guitar player, and it seemed wrong for it to go on sitting there unplayed. She asked Elvis if he would like to have it. He looked at the guitar for a long time. Then he said he could not take a thing like that for free. She said she was not giving it to him for free. She was giving it to him in exchange for coming back and telling her someday whether the tension resolved, whether the 2 things that didn't fit together found a way. She wanted to know how the music turned out. He said that seemed like a fair trade. She handed him the guitar. He carried it to his truck. He put it in the cab beside him. He drove back to the Crown Electric Company and sat in the parking lot for a while before going inside. He played that guitar for the rest of his life. He did not go back to Bellevue Boulevard. Not because he forgot, he did not forget, but because the life that opened in front of him in the months after that Tuesday afternoon in May moved at a velocity that did not allow for the ordinary continuities. The record, the radio, the television appearances that made the whole country argue about him. The machinery of it, enormous and sudden, carrying him forward with a force that left very little room for looking back. He thought about Ida Mae Tanner. He thought about the piano room and the iced tea and the way she had looked at him across the piano bench and said that some of the most complete musical understanding she had encountered in 37 years had belonged to people who processed it entirely by ear. He thought about her son's guitar against the wall in the corner, 11 years unplayed, and the trade she had proposed. Come back and tell me whether the tension resolved. He never went back. Ida Mae Tanner died in 1963 at the age of 80, still teaching piano on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, still living in the house on Bellevue Boulevard. She died without knowing what had become of the young man with the delivery truck, who had heard her 3 o'clock pupil playing a hymn and come inside for 2 hours and taken an old guitar off her wall in exchange for a promise. She had no way of knowing. She had only his first name, a name that, by 1963, was attached to a face she would have recognized anywhere, on any album cover, on any television screen. But she had not made that connection. She had not known that the young man who stayed was him. Her granddaughter had known. The granddaughter's name was Paulette. She had been 16 in 1954 and had been visiting the house on Bellevue Boulevard on the Tuesday afternoon when the Crown Electric truck pulled up. And she had stood in the hallway and watched through the doorway as the young man with the guitar sat in the piano room with her grandmother and talked for 2 hours. She had known who he was by 1956. She had understood what the guitar against the wall had been and where it had gone. She had kept this for 67 years, through her grandmother's death, through decades of her own life, through the deaths of Elvis Presley, and through the long aftermath of that, because she had not known what to do with it, and because it had seemed, for a very long time, like a story that belonged to the two people who had been in that room, and not to her. In 2022, at the age of 84, knowing that her own time was becoming finite, she had written a letter to Lisa Marie Presley. She had described the afternoon. She had described the guitar and the trade and the promise. She had included, in the envelope, a photograph she had taken from the hallway on that Tuesday afternoon in May 1954. A small photograph, slightly out of focus, of a young man sitting at a piano bench in a sunlit room with his hands in his lap, looking at an upright piano, talking to an old woman in a teaching chair. You could not see his face clearly. You did not need to. She had included one more thing. The guitar case. Not the guitar. The guitar was the one Lisa Marie's father had played in the photographs. The one that had traveled with him. The one that was where such things go when a legend's estate is settled. The case was something else. It was what Ida Mae's son had kept the guitar in against that wall for 11 years. It had his initials on the side in gold leaf. And someone, at some point between that Tuesday in 1954 and the day Elvis Presley died in 1977, had added 2 more initials, in a different hand, in the same gold leaf. EP subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Lisa Marie Presley had made a decision that defied every expectation of everyone who knew her. She had received Paulette's letter in the fall of 2022. She had read it alone. She had sat with it for a long time. Not because she doubted it, but because she understood exactly what it meant, which required sitting with. Her father had added his initials to an old man's guitar case. He had carried the case for 23 years. He had never told anyone about the woman on Bellevue Boulevard who had looked at him across a piano bench and said the thing nobody had said to him before. He had kept the trade and not kept the trade simultaneously, the way certain debts are kept, not paid, not forgotten, just carried. She had called the Tonight Show in December, not to arrange an appearance, to ask a question. If she came on some night unannounced, with something that needed to be seen, would they let her do it? The executive producer had said yes before she finished the sentence. He had told no one else. The rundown for the January taping had not been altered. Jimmy Fallon had not been told. He had turned around on a Tuesday night and seen Elvis Presley's daughter walking down the center aisle of his studio with a guitar case held against her chest like something consecrated, and had held onto his desk with both hands, and that was the truth of how it happened. Now the case was on the desk between them, open, the guitar gone to where it needed to be, the case itself remaining, the gold initials visible to every camera. Lisa Marie looked at Jimmy. She said, his whole life people asked him what the music came from. He never fully answered. I think he didn't fully know. She paused. But there was a woman. On a Tuesday afternoon in Memphis in 1954. And she told him that the place where two things you love don't fit together comfortably is the place where something new gets made. She looked at the case. He never went back to tell her whether the tension resolved. She paused again. It resolved, she said. It resolved so loud the whole world heard it. Jimmy Fallon could not speak. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Lisa Marie reached into the inside pocket of her coat. She removed the photograph. The slightly out-of-focus photograph from a hallway in 1954 of a young man at a piano bench with his hands in his lap, talking to an old woman in a teaching chair in a sunlit room. She set it on the desk beside the guitar case. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at the audience. She said, her name was Ida Mae Tanner. She taught piano on Bellevue Boulevard in Memphis for 37 years. She taught over 400 children. She died in 1963 without knowing that the young man who came inside for 2 hours had become who he became. She looked at the photograph. She never got to hear whether the tension resolved. She paused. I came here because I wanted someone to say her name, in a room with enough people to remember it. The audience did not respond with sound. They responded with the thing that is bigger than sound, with the particular silence of people who have understood something true and are holding it with both hands. Jimmy Fallon stood up from his chair. He did not go to the camera. He did not address the production. He walked around the desk to where Lisa Marie was standing, and he stood beside her the way you stand beside someone who has just done something that cost them something and needed to be done. Close, without touching, simply there. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the guitar case with the 2 sets of initials. He looked at the audience. He said, Ida Mae Tanner. And then he said it again, because some names need to be said twice. Ida Mae Tanner. The audience said it back to him, not prompted, not in unison. One at a time and then together, the name moving through the studio like the thing that it was, a keeping of a promise, 69 years late, in the only room large enough to hold it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Paulette died in March 2023 at the age of 85 in Memphis, in the same city where she had stood in a hallway in 1954 and watched through a doorway as history arranged itself without knowing that was what it was doing. Her family said she had watched the January taping from her living room. They said she had not spoken during it. They said that afterward she had sat quietly for a long time and then said, "Good. That's what I was waiting for." Lisa Marie Presley died unexpectedly 16 days after that taping, on January 12, 2023. She was 54 years old. The photograph of the young man at the piano bench in the sunlit room in 1954 now hangs in the Elvis Presley Birthplace Museum in Tupelo, Mississippi, on loan from the Presley estate, in a frame beside a small placard that reads, "Memphis, Tennessee, May 1954. The afternoon before everything. The guitar case is beside it. Both sets of initials face outward. Ida Mae Tanner's name is on the placard. Some promises take 69 years to keep. But the ones made in a sunlit room over iced tea in exchange for a guitar, those ones always find their way home.